It was a very constructive and warm discussion with President Trump.
For that, the Prime Minister should be condemned. It is unbelievable, Prime Minister.
The pain of more than one group of people can coexist, no matter where that pain began.
The Australian government has consistently been part of international calls for a ceasefire and for a release of hostages.
International issues rarely figure prominently in Australian general elections, and even though the world feels a bit upside down at the moment with the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, the Trump revolution, China's brinksmanship in the Pacific, it's not likely that international issues will be prominent in this campaign. But if there is one issue which will touch the nerve of voters, it's the Middle East conflict. And this is a difficult issue for the Albanese Labor government because both sides on this conflict are hostile to the way Labor has managed the war here.
The Prime Minister is trying to speak out of both sides of his mouth.
Will you sanction Israel for its illegal actions and occupation?
The Arab vote, there's about 800,000 Muslim Australians, is very critical, generally speaking, of Labor's approach, believing it has been far too pro-Israel throughout this conflict.
My family did not flee from a war-torn country to come here as refugees, for me to remain silent when I see atrocities inflicted on innocent people.
And the Jewish community, much smaller but just over 100,000, has been very critical also of Labor, believing it has been far too critical of Israel, especially in the United Nations.
Hamas does not want peace, and it does not want long-term security for the State of Israel.
So how does this play out? On the Arab voting side, the threat to Labor is in Western Sydney, 2 seats especially, Blaxland held by Jason Clare and Watson held by Tony Burke. Now, about a quarter of the electorate in these seats is Muslim, and there's been a group called Muslim Votes that has pitched independent candidates against these Labor figures. Now, look, they hold the seats very comfortably. It would be a big upset for them to actually lose those seats, but nevertheless, this is a risk for Labor. Now, on the other side, on the Jewish vote, the most interest is probably in Macnamara, the country's most marginal electorate. It's held by Labor MP Josh Burns. Now, a lot of the Jewish voters in Macnamara, it's about 10% Jewish, will be hostile to Labor because of Labor's voting position, but Josh Burns is Jewish himself and he has distanced himself from the party on several important votes. How that will play will be interesting.
But the truth is that the last 6 months have been like no other I've experienced in this country. And my grandparents came to this country looking for a safe haven for the Jewish people.
Josh Burns' main rival here in the seat was the Greens, but the Jewish community is certainly not going to be going towards the Greens given their hostility towards Israel throughout this process.
What is the red line for Labor when it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza?
So, look, we're looking at 2 seats in Western Sydney, we're looking at 1 seat in Melbourne that could be impacted by the Middle East. So it's still a very important and a very live issue, but I think you'll find in the end that domestic issues will be more important in this election.